inpatient care, hospital care for a serious mental health issue. I was aware of reports actually from those within the industry and the BBC that know Hugh Edwards of a period of depression that he had suffered in recent years. But as I say, this is a very significant development that Hugh Edwards, according to his wife, has been admitted to hospital for inpatient care for a serious mental disorder.
Yes, no, indeed. Look, if you're just joining us, OK, a series, of course, of breaking stories there. First things first is that the Met Police have conducted an assessment of whatever information they were given and whatever evidence that they were given. And they have determined that there is no information to indicate that a criminal offence has been committed. In reaching this decision, they have spoken to a number of parties, including the BBC and the alleged complainant and the alleged complainant's family, both via another police force. They say now that there is no further police action. They go on to say, as such, the Met has advised the BBC that it can continue with its internal investigation. Now, the other bit of breaking news is that Vicky Flynn, who is the wife of Hugh Edwards, has named Hugh Edwards now as the BBC presenter at the centre of this scandal. She has gone on to say, according to reports, that he's suffering from serious mental health issues and is now receiving inpatient hospital care where he will stay for the foreseeable future. So there we go. Right, lots to go out there, and I will hand you over now to Rory with your latest headlines, followed, of course, by Dewbs & Co.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Well, as you've been hearing, Vicky Flynn, the wife of newsreader Hugh Edwards, has named him as the BBC presenter facing allegations over payments for sexually explicit images in a statement issued on his behalf. In her statement, Vicky said her husband Hugh was suffering from serious mental health issues and is now receiving inpatient hospital care where he will stay for the foreseeable future, as she asked for privacy for her family. The statement comes after Met Police detectives have determined there is no information to indicate that a criminal offence has been committed by Hugh Edwards. But the Met has advised the BBC it can continue with its internal investigation. A total of 4 claims have been made towards Mr. Edwards. We will, of course, bring you more on that throughout the evening. But in other news, G7 leaders have signed a joint declaration in support of Ukraine, promising to stand by the country for as long as it takes. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says it marks a new high point in the world's support for Ukraine as the war against Russia continues.
Together with our G7 partners, we have agreed to provide the long-term bilateral security commitments that Ukraine needs. These commitments mark a new high point in international support for Ukraine. And I want to be clear, they are not a substitute for NATO membership. The summit communiqué echoes the UK's long-held position that Ukraine's future is in NATO. And we've taken a big step this week towards bringing Ukraine into the alliance.
Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has suggested Ukraine should show gratitude for the military support it has been given. He says the US and the UK are not an Amazon service for weapons to the country. But the Prime Minister says President Zelensky has expressed gratitude on a number of occasions. President Zelensky reiterated he is thankful for all the help, and he understands that being part of NATO is not possible just yet.
I believe that we will be in NATO when the security situation would be stabilized, and that means when the war will be finished. Ukraine will definitely be invited to NATO, and Ukraine will definitely become a member nation to the alliance. I haven't heard any other opinion today. For me, it was important that the NATO declaration contained security.
The first asylum seekers have arrived at a former RAF airbase in Essex. 46 people arrived at Wethersfield today, with more individuals to arrive in the coming weeks. The site, which can house up to 1,700 single adult men, is expected to be fully operational by autumn. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the facility is in good condition to house migrants.
It's right that we house those people who've come across in small boats in appropriate accommodation. It was never fair to the British taxpayer that people were being housed in expensive forms of accommodation, and the sites that we're bringing forward now provide decent but not luxurious accommodation, and we'll be standing up more in the future.
TV, online, DAB+, radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now, though, it's over to Patrick and Emily.
Yes, well, welcome back. Of course, we are reacting now to that big breaking news, which is, of course, that firstly, the Metropolitan Police have decided that there is nothing they believe to be criminal in relation to the BBC presenter scandal. The second big piece of breaking news is that Hugh Edwards' wife, Vicky Flynn, has now named Hugh Edwards as the BBC presenter at the centre of that scandal, and gone on to say that her husband was suffering from serious mental health issues and is receiving inpatient hospital care. So those are the latest developments at the moment.
Well, there are many questions to ask now. What does this say for The Sun? What will the BBC's response to this be? We have a statement from the BBC, I believe, if you've got that to hand.
Yeah. So the BBC, of course, going to now conduct their internal investigation into all of this, as they can do, because the Metropolitan Police have said that there is nothing that they believe that they can do going forward. As far as they are aware, nothing criminal has taken place.
And many questions about why Hugh Edwards did not name himself. It now seems clear, if we take his wife's statement, that he has, in fact, been suffering from serious mental health issues, receiving inpatient hospital care where he will stay for the foreseeable future. Yeah, indeed. And Mark White joins us and will do for the foreseeable future as well. Mark White, thank you very much, our Home and Security Editor. Yes, so what is the latest then? It's fast-paced, this.
Well, of course, we were reporting on the big breaking news that the Metropolitan Police had decided that that initial allegation that was reported in the Sun newspaper last Friday did not amount in their assessment to a criminal offence having been committed, so they weren't going forward with that investigation, and therefore they're handing it back to the BBC to carry out whatever investigations they wanted in relation to the slew of allegations that were made after that first splash in the Sun last Friday. Then, of course, as we're reporting on that, and the BBC acknowledging that they are now going to take forward their own internal processes to look at the other allegations, we had the wife of Hugh Edwards coming out with that sensational statement to not only confirm that her husband is the man at the centre of these allegations, but that now he has been committed to a hospital with serious mental health issues for the foreseeable future, she said. So clearly some real concern for her going forward, and for all those who have a duty of care to this presenter.
And what The Sun reported initially was that he paid for explicit content from a 17-year-old. Does that now mean that is totally unfounded? The police have not found any truth to that, because that was a criminal offence. That is a criminal offence.
What they have not found is any criminality. Now, that doesn't mean that at the end of the day, with a full investigation that the BBC is now free to launch, that they don't find inappropriate behaviour. We know with regard to Philip Schofield, for instance, he did not commit a criminal offence, but in having an affair with a younger, much younger member of staff, the power dynamics and all of that, it was deemed to be inappropriate, and he lost his job because of that. So these allegations may not, the other ones, amount to any kind of criminality, but it could be a pattern of inappropriate behaviour. We don't know that.
No, absolutely. Now, I am just going to read Vicky Flynn's statement in full. So this is the wife of BBC presenter Hugh Edwards, who has now named him as the presenter who's been at the centre of this scandal. So I'll read this statement to you in full. In light of the recent reporting regarding the BBC presenter, I am making this statement on behalf of my husband, Hugh Edwards, after what have been 5 extremely difficult days for our family. I'm doing this primarily out of concern for his mental well-being and to protect our children. Hugh is suffering from serious mental health issues. As is well documented, he has been treated for severe depression in recent years. The events of the last few days have greatly worsened matters. He has suffered another serious episode and is now receiving inpatient hospital care where he will stay for the foreseeable future. She goes on to say, once well enough to do so, he intends to respond to the stories that have been published. To be clear, Hugh was first told that there were allegations being made against him last Thursday. In the circumstances and given Hugh's condition, I would like to ask that the privacy of my family and everyone else caught up in these upsetting events is respected. She finishes by saying, I know that Hugh is deeply sorry that so many colleagues have been impacted by the recent media speculation. We hope this statement will bring that to an end. A lot of very revealing stuff in there, I think, especially reading
There is
between the lines.
absolutely, and I was in to cover for Michelle Dewberry, and the first question we were going to ask tonight was, do you have sympathy? Are you starting to have sympathy for this unnamed BBC presenter? We now know it is Hugh Edwards, the man in question. We know now this statement from his wife saying that he is in a deeply precarious mental health situation. So I wonder whether things have changed.
Yeah, indeed, Mark.
Well, I think we need to take a little step back. Absolutely, there's concern for Hugh Edwards and the emotional and mental state that he is in at the moment. His wife saying that the allegations absolutely worsened what was an ongoing condition in terms of severe depression that had been reported in the past. People knew that he had suffered from severe depression for a number of years. One can only imagine facing those allegations and being told on Thursday, and then for allegation after allegation to come in the days that followed, that would have absolutely a very detrimental effect on his ongoing mental health. However, what I'm saying is, in terms of taking a step back, although the Metropolitan Police have said today that they have assessed the allegations that were made that first were splashed in the Sun newspaper last Thursday as not crossing a threshold into criminality. That doesn't mean that at the end of the day, with a formal investigation carried out internally by the BBC, that they don't find that there was inappropriate behaviour here. And also the other allegations that were reported by the BBC's own news division yesterday, allegations regarding contact on a dating site, pressure that an individual says they felt under, very threatening and abusive and expletive-laden messages then sent apparently to that individual when that individual was talking about the possibility of outing this person online. What I'm saying is, in the fullness of time, with a proper internal investigation, there may be inappropriate conduct that is found. I don't know.
What you're
because
saying
we
is
don't
that
know
there
the facts.
still remain very serious allegations, but the police have handed it over back to the BBC because there is no sign of criminality. It does make us view some of the tweets that have been coming out today from other BBC presenters in a slightly different light, because you had Jeremy Vine, who arguably was grandstanding a little, saying he must name himself for the benefit of us and for the benefit of him. Then you had the former presenter, Richard Bacon, say, no, think about how he may be feeling. He may be having dark times. I can't remember the exact words of what he tweeted, but he said, essentially, be careful, have a bit of emotional intelligence. Seeing this statement now from his wife.
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? Because look, when a lot of people, myself included, I think in the first wake of this story, were calling on Hugh Edwards to either name himself or for there to be some naming of it, it was primarily based around the absolutely defamatory and slanderous allegations that were being completely trotted out left, right and centre on Twitter, and I can completely understand that people there were saying it. I do think that there was a public interest versus the rights to privacy issue there as well. Clearly there has been some developments on this with his wife coming out and saying that, well, basically saying that he's had some clearly quite serious mental episode, I suppose you could say, and that he is receiving ongoing inpatient care. I suspect, Mark, it's fair to say that at this moment in time, frankly, nobody is emerging particularly well from this situation.
Well, the story that The Sun put forward, alleging potential criminality here, clearly in the Met's eyes, is not true to that extent that it doesn't cross a criminal threshold. They clearly, I think, were not as convinced by the story, or at least how criminally culpable the individual, now we know Hugh Edwards, was, because they decided not to name him. There are privacy laws, but there is a defence as well. If you uncover what is blatant criminality, then clearly a person could be named. They never did. From
is the question...
Thursday Friday of last week right through to today, they still haven't named him until, of course, the name is now out there.
That's true. Is it fair to say perhaps some might view this and view the criminality element as almost being a red herring insofar as there are such serious allegations against him that remain, whether they fall above or below criminality?
Shall we have a quick reminder, I think, of some of the allegations that were levelled at the person that has now been revealed as Hugh Edwards? OK, so there was well, go on, you take it.
Look, it's a really, really complicated picture, and we have to be careful because although Hugh Edwards has now been named by his wife, the other people at the centre of these allegations have not been named, have not come forward in a sense that they want to be publicly identified. So we can't even go there in terms of talking about sex of individuals or anything like that. That's why we say person or individuals. The first allegation relates to an individual, a young individual, who was, according to this person's mother and stepfather, 17 at a time when they were in communication with Hugh Edwards, that Hugh Edwards had received explicit pictures from this individual, that also Hugh Edwards had paid significant sums of money to this person as well, and the parents said this person was vulnerable because they had a drug habit. So the issue of how young this person was, because they were under the age of 18, and it is apparently, of course, I say apparently, it is a criminal offence to send or solicit pictures of anyone who is under 18, even though, of course, you can have sexual relations with someone over the age of 16. Actually sending pictures, soliciting pictures, would be a criminal offence. But looking into this, it seems the Met have either seen evidence that suggests that the person was over 18, or there is not enough in the way of evidence to confirm that the pictures were sent when the person was under 18. And that means anyway that they have reached the conclusion the criminal threshold has not been crossed. They are not launching a criminal investigation. As I said, it doesn't mean that at the end of the day, the BBC investigation that goes forward now into Hugh Edwards doesn't find some kind of pattern of behaviour that they deem to be inappropriate. We don't know that at this stage.
Yeah, exactly that. This is it. And again, there were layers to the different things. There was the initial concern over criminality. That appears now not to be the case, and the Metropolitan Police have made that abundantly clear. This now becomes an internal BBC issue, and that issue will be around whether or not Hugh Edwards has acted inappropriately, whether or not there's been an abuse of power, whether there is a moral issue there. Look, I mean, when it comes to even the breaking lockdown rules, I don't know whether or not the Metropolitan Police have really considered that. I suspect that the other allegation will have been...
Well, it's an important point, because what they've said, it's not that they've not considered it.
Right.
No information has been passed to them formally for them to investigate that. Now, that doesn't mean that someone, perhaps the Sun, someone else might not do that. Someone who has a particular issue and is concerned about whether Hugh Edwards did break lockdown rules. So it's possible that if they receive a complaint, they may then have to investigate that. And then that will depend on the evidence that's there, perhaps the electronic evidence of interaction with the other individual that we're talking about. This is the third individual now in terms of the allegation chain. A third individual that was reported in the Sun newspaper this morning who claimed that they had met Hugh Edwards on a dating app, that they had come under pressure to meet Hugh Edwards and that he had travelled outside to another county during the third lockdown in February of 2021 to meet this person. Now, if there is electronic evidence that absolutely backs that up, that did happen, then it is possible. Other people have retrospectively been prosecuted, issued, I should say, at least with these fixed penalty notices for breaking COVID rules. So that's possible.
I want to know, I believe we have Michael Cole joining us, former BBC correspondent. Michael, are you there?
I am indeed, and what terrible, sad and tragic news, because it involves at least two families, and the sadness, certainly the statement by Hugh Edwards' wife certainly speaks to that, and one can only imagine what it's like in that family tonight and their children. But also there is this rather troubled young man who we understand has problems with drugs, and he obviously is not on good terms with his mother and stepfather. So at least two families involved. It ought to be remembered that only 10 days, as far as I can calculate it, before the mother of this young boy contacted the BBC with her first complaint, Hugh Edwards was the lead commentator on the coronation, on the King's coronation. And of course, as we all know, he was the go-to man. He was the face of the BBC. He was the Richard Dimbleby of our age, as far as the BBC were concerned. So one can understand how seriously they should have taken it. They should have taken it a lot seriously a lot earlier, I might say. But here we have it. And this poor man... Yes, go ahead.
Michael, you say, talking about where the BBC goes from here, they've issued a statement saying that the police have confirmed they've completed their assessment, not taking further action. We will now move forward with our work. That means an internal investigation, I presume. What do you think that looks like in reality for our viewers and listeners? What does an internal investigation into the facts at the BBC actually look like?
You're talking to the right person, because I know all about them. And what happens is that the bigwigs in the various departments who may have a say on this will get together and they'll call together the facts such as they are, and they'll ruminate for a bit and they'll talk around it and they'll decide what remedy, if any remedy, there is to take, and how they should alter their procedures. But the thing about this is that it's been too little, too late. They've been very heavy-footed. This should have been on their radar immediately after the mother first brought it to their attention. But as we understand it, the Director General, Tim Davie, didn't know until last Thursday about this. Now, that is appalling, because the Director General isn't just the Director General. He's the editor-in-chief. He's therefore responsible for everything in the way of news and current affairs emanating from the BBC. And the first job of the editor-in-chief is to know everything. There are things that he'll never publish, but he needs to know everything. And we need to have somebody at the head of the BBC who's a journalist. And I'm sure Tim Davie's a very nice and charming man, and I'm sure he was probably a brilliant marketing man, but not for one day in his life has he ever been a journalist. Now, any journalist, and you've had some around you sitting there, would have known from the start, as soon as the name of Hugh Edwards was mentioned in this context and then was built upon, red lights should have been flashing. And I can only think that it's poor staff work on the part of the people who should be advising Tim Davie in this. They should have been on top of this. They should have dealt with it. And at the last minute, we hear that poor Hugh is in hospital, where I'm probably is the best place for him.
Yeah, and for the foreseeable future as well. Just, I mean, not having to actually read that much between the lines of what his wife said, to be fair. I mean, clearly he is and has been in a bad way, and he's going to be in hospital for some time, for the foreseeable future. His wife there, Vicky Flynn, alluded to the fact that he has previously had suffered from depression. She goes on to say that he's been treated for severe depression in recent years, and as one would imagine, the events of the last few days have greatly worsened matters. Again, a serious episode, she says. Look, Michael, there is going to be an inquest on top of an inquest on top of an inquest here, because we're going to end up with the son being made to account for a variety of different things. No doubt the son will be able to put up a robust defence for the right of a free press and the right of public interest, etc. Then you're going to end up with potentially the Met Police, although they have now come out. Why did it take them so long to discount anything? They would probably argue they're doing a very thorough job, and they've come out now. You will obviously have the inquest into Hugh Edwards himself, because there are a lot of different aspects to conduct here. Criminality was just one of those aspects. But as you were alluding to as well, possibly the biggest inquest of all will be the BBC's handling of this. If they've known about something for 2 months and then waited until the Thursday, presumably when they had a phone call to say, we are splashing on this tomorrow, and this is getting out, that, for a man who has had mental health issues, will no doubt have been a catastrophic way to go about this for Hugh Edwards.
Well, you've summed it up brilliantly. The BBC is ponderous to the point of elephantine on occasions like this. It's always behind the curve. It's always reacting and never taking the lead. I don't have a PhD in Hugh Edwards studies, but I have noticed that in recent interviews, he has been talking about being unable to sleep. I think he has mentioned depression. He said some really rather odd things in interviews, like, when I retire, I want to be Piers Morgan. I certainly, whoever Piers Morgan is, whatever station he's on. But these are strange things. At least that's what I thought from this rather straight Welsh church background, Welsh-speaking bastion of the BBC. And as I say, he was their face, and very much so, and very dependable. And there he is, taking command of the news desk, as you do so admirably. So it is, whichever way you look at it, it's a little psychodrama all by itself. And I think at this time we've got to realize that we've actually looked at this from the point of view of news all the time and not gossip. And it is news, and it's very sad. Mental health is very well up there on the news agenda on any day, as you well know, because you look into it. And we have to look at this in a human way. And there are at least 2 families, maybe more, at the heart of it. And I hesitate to make judgments on anybody at any time until I've heard all the evidence. I don't know him. I retired from the BBC in '88 before he came to prominence. But honestly, I think we can only wish everybody well, particularly the young man whose relationship with him sparked this when his concerned parents went to the BBC. The BBC should have acted quicker. Tim Davies should have had better wingmen. Yeah. He should have been swooping in on that.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael Cole, for your time. Former BBC correspondent and someone who knows how these sorts of things work at the BBC, particularly when it comes to investigations as well. It's interesting, though, to think that if he's in this serious condition, how will the BBC be able to now investigate what happened without being able to speak to him? We shall see. Well, we have with us on the table my wonderful panel. I'm very sorry for leaving you waiting, but of course we've had this breaking news. We have Kerry Dingle with us, thank you very much indeed, and David Starkey. I will, before we come to you, just reread the statement that was released to the PA news agency by Vicky Flynn. That's the wife of Hugh Edwards, the BBC newsreader. It said, in light of the recent reporting regarding the BBC presenter, in quotes, I am making this statement on behalf of my husband, Hugh Edwards, after what have been 5 extremely difficult days for our family. I am doing this primarily out of concern for his mental well-being and to protect our children.
Yes, well, there we go. She obviously went on to say, didn't she, as well, that Hugh Edwards is in hospital receiving treatment. He has had a serious medical episode and his depression has got worse, and he will be in a medical facility for some time. David, I'll bring you in now, David Starkey. Well, there's a lot to react to here. I'm just going to get your overall assessment.
I feel great sadness for him, and I also feel contempt. The sadness is, let's be blunt, we haven't actually talked about what the clear issue is. This is a middle-aged heterosexual man who's discovered he's fundamentally gay. As far as the evidence seems to...
We don't know the circumstances of that.
OK, just start there for a second. I understand what you're saying. I am going to come in and say that, as yet, we do not know the gender.
We're being... Everybody's being said the youth.
OK, yeah, the youth. That's the thing. We do not know the gender, but carry on, David, yes. I know.
Let us then start again. I think that is likely to be the case. Let us be kind to him and assume for one moment it is. This is a terrible thing to happen to a man, to a marriage, to his children. But of course, it's coupled with something else. It's coupled with that overwhelming sense of the smugness of the star presenter. I know, I've been there, and I've lost friends, one actually in particular, whom I bitterly regret, because of the arrogance that treatment entails. You are... The car door is open for you. That wonderful phrase of Peter Mandelson, the same being government minister. What is the most terrible thing about ceasing to be government minister? You get in the back seat of cars and expect them to drive off by themselves. Well, you do as a presenter. You are asked, what drink would you like? Is that chair too high? Is that room too warm? You suddenly think you're invulnerable. You're inviolable. You become profoundly entitled. And I think this and the business of the mental, the story of the kind of what we used to call nervous breakdown. It's a clash between these two things, which of course is not only a car crash for the individual, as I said, for his family, and sort of for the BBC. I was a little unsympathetic to what Michael Coles was saying, in that the BBC must receive these kind of rumours every day of the week on all of its main... Look how the internet leapt on all of these other presenters. And presumably there is some sort of screening process. Again, the family in question, remember, went to the police very beginning, and the police said there wasn't a criminal issue right at the beginning. So in this extraordinary business in which we have major institutions, in a sense, expected to assume a role of moral guardian. I don't know about you. Would you like your private life to be morally guardianed by Angelos and this station?
I think that's a very good point. Many people would argue that if there is no criminality, then there is no public interest. Kerry, what do you think? Do you agree with David that, well, do you have a feeling of sadness as well, a feeling of sympathy? What's your reaction?
Not really. And that sounds
there we go.
terribly. That sounds terribly hard-nosed, doesn't it?
No.
I'm sure he's being very well looked after. You know, somebody as rich and famous as him isn't going to get the treatment that I know people who've had mental health breakdowns and psychotic episodes have got in Hackney, in East London, where the treatment is appalling. He'll probably be perfectly well looked after, so no, I'm not weeping. And I do think David's got a point about the narcissism of top-end newsreaders and presenters, and that extraordinary level of entitlement means you do something as stupid as talking to youngsters of whatever sex they are, of a very young age. But having said that, I do think we should stop referring to the younger people involved as though they were children. I mean, these are adults. You know, these are over 16s. Now, maybe, you know, one has a drug problem, therefore that makes them vulnerable. But they are over 16, and I think we do young people no favours by infantilising them.
Look, I completely agree with you, and I suspect that the vast majority of the nation do. However, there is a bizarre quirk of our law and our legal system, as you well know, that will mean
it's a product of confusion about the age of consent in the 1990s, when the age of there was a special age of consent for gay relationships of 18. That's where it all comes from. But surely there's another thing. The parents have been constantly referring to this as their child. And one can understand this desperate desire of parents to protect.
But we need to be accurate with our language.
We do, but it's all very well, isn't it, to say that a 17-year-old is an adult. We all know that maybe in the most narrow legal definition they are, in behavioural terms, they're not.
And this is why we ended up in this situation.
Hold that thought. We are now joined by former BBC News producer and director of Newswatch, David Keeley. Thank you very much indeed, David. I'll ask your reaction to what we've found out in the last, well, half an hour or so. Hugh Edwards has been named by his wife.
I think, as with everyone, I'm just catching up on this. I think, as with everyone, and what I've heard of your discussion, a great mixture of feelings about it. Obviously, there is great sympathy for someone in mental distress, and I think it's very important that we keep in perspective too that nothing in terms of his behaviour has been proved or disproved as yet. The jury has to be still out in terms of what actually happened. What I would say, though, is that coming back to what Michael Cole, I gather, was saying earlier, the BBC's own internal processes for dealing with problems, their complaints procedure is a shambles. And I know this was a sensitive issue. This isn't an impartiality issue or something about accuracy in terms of what's on output, but all employers have a duty of care. And what we were seeing here was that there was a big delay between the original reporting of this issue and actual action being taken. And I think the BBC need, and in my organisation, Newswatch, is campaigning for this. The BBC need to overhaul its complaints procedure completely to make it much more transparent, much more independent, and much more reactive in a genuine way to events that are going on.
Yeah, no, indeed. And actually, it has been a morbidly fascinating lesson in the way that media in general operates. So it started with The Sun, OK, tabloid press coming out, pushing its free speech, quite a salacious allegation. That's the kind of stuff that gets put out there, right? It is unquestionably a news story, and it is unquestionably grabbing. So therefore, it becomes the leading news agenda of the day. Then the BBC kind of eats itself alive with it. It culminates in some BBC reporters then turning on Hugh Edwards and basically saying he should reveal himself. And then now we end up with a situation where it sounds very much as though a chap is receiving very urgent, potentially anyway, life-saving care as an inpatient in a hospital. The police say no criminality. The BBC are doing their own internal investigation in all of this. Look, at the very least, David, whilst we have sympathy, of course, for Hugh Edwards' current mental state, and no doubt he's been through the ringer, at the very least, David, it does look as though some quite bizarre behaviour has exhibited itself, especially for a married man with children, and somebody who is supposed to have been embodying the BBC's values and culture. How do you see this one playing out from this moment in time?
Well, what I would say, again, I'm afraid, is that nothing has yet been proved. I take your point completely that it looks on the surface that there is, shall we say, difficult behaviour in this equation. There may be abuse of power. All sorts of things come into the equation. But I come back to the point that what is vital here is not to come to judgments at the moment, but to wait for the BBC to come to grips with the facts as far as they can ascertain them, and to be transparent about that, so that we know if it was the case that a BBC presenter was abusing their position in some way, then obviously that is a matter of serious concern. Someone with such a high profile as Hugh Edwards in particular. But again, I stress, I'm not reaching that judgment myself. I'm just saying that is one of the big issues involved.
David, now Hugh Edwards, absolutely massive figure at the BBC, been working there for, I don't know how many years. Decades. Did you know him personally?
I don't know him personally. No, I was at the BBC in the 1980s, before he was on the horizon, even as a news presenter.
Were you aware that he had suffered in the past from mental health issues, had problems in that respect?
I was, and in fact, I also, as well as being a trained news person, news exec, etc., I am a trained psychotherapist. So I'm particularly interested in the impact of, if you like, psychological issues on the media. And I noted he was depressed. You can see from what he's written about that and spoken about that he's been in distress for some time.
I'm interested in if these allegations, they are serious, even if they don't reach the threshold of criminality. What makes a man risk?
Well,
like
this
kind of behaviour.
This kind
of behaviour. Is it narcissism? Is it a sense of entitlement, or is it that we all do? You know.
So David Starkey is adamant that it is something more
Yes, I was choosing to ignore David.
It's called sex, for heaven's sake.
Well, all right then, David.
Cannot we be sensible? This looks to be very similar to Philip Schofield. Most men.
Well, we can't. Yeah, look.
So,
please,
we
can't
this
say
is
that at the moment. So
this seems to me to be absurd shyness.
Okay.
But nevertheless, let us try to do something.
All right.
Else. We've been talking about Hugh Edwards as though he's some great titanic figure, representative of the values of the being. This man is what?
Right.
He is a newsreader. He reads from autocue. One of the reasons why people like this have nervous breakdowns is because they're invented figures. They're not serious, and yet they assume this huge gravitas.
I appreciate what you've said. I hope that everybody watching and listening also appreciates that this is an incredibly fast-moving situation and that there are a variety of different allegations still out there in the public domain at the moment that remain unproven. Now, I'm reading a statement here. In light of the recent reporting regarding the BBC presenter, this is from Vicky Flynn, who is Hugh Edwards' wife. She says, I am making this statement on behalf of my husband, Hugh Edwards, after what have been 5 extremely difficult days for our family. I'm doing this primarily out of concern for his mental well-being and to protect our children. Hugh is suffering from serious mental health issues, as is well documented. He has been treated for severe depression in recent days. The events of the last few days have greatly worsened matters. He has suffered another serious episode and is now receiving inpatient hospital care, where he will stay for the foreseeable future. Once well enough to do so, he intends to respond to the stories that have been published. To be clear, Hugh was first told that there were allegations being made against him last Thursday. In the circumstances, and given Hugh's condition, I would like to ask that the privacy of my family and everyone else caught up in these upsetting events is respected. I know that Hugh is deeply sorry that so many colleagues have been impacted by the recent media speculation. We hope this statement will bring an end to that. And I also just want to re-emphasise again and make one thing very, very clear, that the Metropolitan Police have had a look at anything that they would have been deemed to have considered criminal behaviour. They have decided that nothing criminal has taken place, and it is now over to the BBC to launch an internal investigation.
I think the big question, too, is what impact will this have on the media coverage? Will The Sun back off? Will people on social media back off? Will the media die down? Clearly, Hugh Edwards' wife hopes so with this statement.
OK.
But we shall see.
Well, just before we go back to the panel, we're going to bring in now former Ofcom Chief Media Advisor Martin Campbell. Martin, thank you very much. It does very much go from one minefield to another, I must admit, when it comes to the reporting on all of this latest ongoing issues. Just give me, with your former Ofcom Chief Media Advisor cap on, just give me your take on what we know so far, a series of breaking news events in relation to Hugh Edwards.
Well, I mean, from what we now know to be the case, and we can put an awful lot of the awful speculation aside, but the fact of the matter is that what this appears to show is there will still be arguments about whether anything criminal has happened and whether someone was 17 and so on. But the fact of the matter is, if you cut through this, the one thing that is certain for sure is just how inept the BBC still is in handling anything like this at all. I mean, the delay in them doing anything sensible has clearly made it 10 times worse for them. And I think, Patrick, what it does is also highlight the ridiculous position that overpaid talent has actually got now at the BBC. It appears to be untouchable, but if you start paying people, pay a newsreader £500,000 a year, and you pay a sports commentator, £1.33 million, and then you get the CEO saying he's the best sports commentator in the world, then it's gone mad. The tail's wagging the dog, and I think that to have talent that appear to be more influential than the management is what has happened at the BBC, which is why the whole structure needs to be looked at, and it's why you finish up with something like this that needn't actually have got to this stage by the sounds of it. And obviously we don't know everything, but here you have someone who's clearly not very well, and all this could actually perhaps have been sorted in a quieter, sensible way if the BBC weren't so inept.
So, Martin, you believe quite strongly that the talent, or the presenters, the newsreaders, the very highly paid staff at the BBC feel as though they're untouchable by the same rules that everyone else has to play by in the organisation?
Yeah, well, they are, aren't they? I mean, you've only got to look at Gary Lineker. Yes, we're going to make sure that Gary Lineker tones down his tweets. Well, he hasn't, and nobody's done anything. So the whole thing's a nonsense.
OK, look, regardless of what happens now going forward, I mean, again, I want to emphasise there's a series of different things at play here for Hugh Edwards, OK? So there was the initial element of alleged criminality, which now doesn't exist, OK? There was also the idea of whether or not there's an abuse of power, being aggressive and threatening to somebody else. There was the potential breach of lockdown rules, which we're as yet unsure as to whether or not that includes the criminality that's mentioned in the Met Police's statement, by the way. There's also these quotes-unquote creepy messages, etc. Look, Martin, is this it for Hugh?
Well, I think clearly he is not well, and he is certainly not well. And so I certainly can't see him coming back into the fray anytime soon. And you have to remember that, I mean, although he clearly publicly said that, maybe he should get a bit more recognition than he is getting. He was the voice at the Queen's funeral, he was the voice of the coronation. And I can't see the BBC putting him back in that position. And for health reasons, maybe they shouldn't.
OK, no, look, we'll have to wait and see, obviously, how all of this pans out. Can I just raise as well one thing that I think, presumably, a lot of people will be thinking? It is Hugh Edwards' wife who has come out and released this statement. And for all of this hoo-ha about the way that the BBC have handled this, how long it must have taken the Met to release this statement, the Sun, Hugh Edwards himself, and whilst clearly huge levels of sympathy for anybody who is suffering, by the sounds of it, the kind of episode that Hugh Edwards is, and we don't wish anything like that upon anyone, his behaviour from the allegations would insinuate that, there's something slightly untoward, potentially, maybe there. I feel very, very sorry for his wife and kids.
Well, yes.
And I think that's important that they're not lost all in this, Martin.
They are, and as a media advisor, one of the great things that has obviously changed for me over the years now is how social media has pervaded the whole landscape and effectively poisoned it, because what we used to regard as Fleet Street now will find that they have to go a lot further than they would normally have done, even during the reign of the Red Tops. They will have to go further, because if they don't, someone on social media will. And this is a problem that the whole of the media needs to face up to now, because fair game, it seems to be the catchphrase for anything that happens now, and that's a shame, because the difference between what you and I remember as old Fleet Street and newspapers and media today is now miles apart, simply because of social media.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Martin. Martin Campbell, their former Ofcom chief media advisor. It is terribly, terribly sad that his wife has had to release this statement. Must be going through such pain and anguish.
It's absolutely devastating for pretty much everybody involved. Clearly, Hugh is suffering, and this is the statement, Emily. I think if you want to read out, this is from his wife.
Yeah, this is from his wife. In light of the recent reporting regarding the BBC presenter, I am making this statement on behalf of my husband, Hugh Edwards, after what have been 5 extremely difficult days for our family. I'm doing this primarily out of concern for his mental well-being and to protect our children.
Yes.
Who is suffering from serious mental health issues. As is well documented, he has been treated for severe depression in recent years. The events of the last few days have greatly worsened matters. He has suffered another serious episode and is now receiving inpatient hospital care where he'll stay for the foreseeable future. Once well enough to do so, he intends to respond to the stories that have been published. To be clear, Hugh was first told that there were allegations being made against him last Thursday. In the circumstances and given Hugh's condition, I would like to ask that the privacy of my family and everyone else caught up in these upsetting events is respected. I know that Hugh is deeply sorry that so many colleagues have been impacted by the recent media speculation. We hope this statement will bring that to an end. Kerry.
I just wanted to slightly disagree with Martin, maybe your final point, Patrick, because just saying, you know, unlike Fleet Street, you know, social media is all way out of control. That's an attack on us. That's an attack on ordinary people commenting and having their say. And I think the vast majority of ordinary people will be entirely sympathetic to Hugh's wife and kids and the trauma they've gone through, entirely. So accusing the public of being some battering ram that wants more prurience for a presenter. Yes, terrible he's ill. Newsreader, terrible he's ill, but oversexed and overpaid doesn't get my sympathy.
No, and look, it is. I say this with my eyes wide open.
Nor does the behaviour of the public. What the internet shows is that the public, without rules, behaves badly. There are 2 completely different views of human nature. One is that we're naturally good, that's Rousseau, and rules make us bad. The other is Thomas Hobbes, that we're naturally bad and rules make us good.
And that's why you go, David.
The internet shows conclusively that Thomas Hobbes is right.
And you're better than the public, then.
And the public without control, and the public... This is why we invented... I know in Hackney it doesn't happen. This is why we invented civilization. This is why we invented civilization and law.
And
civilization makes us better, except in Hackney.
I think you make a decent point.
I'm just going to jump in. I'm actually as possibly saved by the Met Police here, possibly saved by the siren, not so much the bell. I have a full Met Police statement now to bring you. So, detectives from the Met Specialist Command have now concluded their assessment and have determined there is no information to indicate that a criminal offence has been committed. Oh, sorry.
I
had anticipated that statement would have gone on for a bit longer, but I suppose it is the Met Police, in fact, isn't it? Now, we are here at GBNews going to be sticking with this story. It is clearly a huge series of all linked but different breaking news stories. Firstly, there was that Met Police statement which says that no criminal offence has been committed. The BBC now will conduct its own internal investigation. Hugh Edwards' wife then came out and named him as the presenter at the centre of this scandal, but also followed that up with the revelation that Hugh Edwards, of course, now is indeed receiving medical treatment in hospital due to a resurgence of severe depression. They are hoping that potentially brings an end to the matter. He will respond to the slew of allegations in due course.
This has been a slightly different version of Dewbs & Co.
Yes, to say the very least.
It's been Carver & Co.
Carver & Co. Well, I have been happy to be the Co in a way. Can I just say thank you very much to both panellists
Thank you very much indeed.
Not exactly what you signed up to, it must be said when you came on the show. I just want to say to people as well, stay tuned right here because we're staying with this story. Now, Mark White, our home security editor, is hot-footing it back into the studio as we speak, as is Nigel Farage. So make sure you keep it GB News here for Mark White and Nigel Farage, who will be on your screens in just a matter of seconds. Take care.